Evening, Charlotte. It's great that you could join us tonight. We do a Q&A series as part of the club, and we've had a few footballers on, such as Nathan Thompson, Effie Sodge, Darren Prattley. We've had Jordan Reynolds, the boxer, on. And I suppose as we grow this Q&A series for the club, it's great to have a female footballer on for the first time representing the game. So, I appreciate your time coming on. And it's all part of the boys learning for what they can take away for those who've made it in sport, those who can give them life lessons, and individuals like yourselves who have done so well in the game and have that experience to speak from. So I know they're looking forward to having you on. We've got players from all age groups, and we're recording this and sharing it across all the others for those who can't make it. So we're building up a great resource and bank of education for these boys, because I believe in education for them from a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. Education is key. I mean, I'm not sure how old you boys are, but I've played football since I was 4 years old, and I didn't really get into academies until I was 15. And that's where my learning, I felt like it really began, because I played football just for the pure love of the sport up until I went into an academy, and I didn't realize there was so much more detail involved in the game. And it's not just a physical and technical side, it's also mental. So it's a pleasure to be on the call and sharing my learning with you all.
Yeah, and that's appreciative, and mindfulness, as you said, there is a key thing. And we played this morning, and Carson played, and Taylor, who's the other guest on for the 11s, played. Unfortunately, Benji missed out due to COVID this morning, but they played this morning, and unfortunately, we lost. But we were trying to get across that is there was so much importance in losing this morning, because it was only our second loss this season or year. And we have to take as much learning from the losses as we do the winning. And sometimes we can take more learning from the loss itself rather than the we've won again today, for example.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about it, when you're learning all of the time, you all of a sudden think about everything that's good, and you don't really think about the constructive parts of the game where you can improve. So losing really forces you to look in the mirror and look at yourself in the most realistic way possible, and see which areas of your game that you can improve on. Because unless you have that true reflection of yourself, you don't improve. You just think that you're there all the time. You're never getting better and better. And if you're winning, you're like that. You take a little dip, you learn, and then you can go that little bit step up. You can step up that little bit more. But I'm sorry to hear about you missing the game today, Ben. I can completely relate, because I've came out in Switzerland and I'm actually injured, so I still haven't had the chance to train yet. Thank you. So I still haven't had the chance to train yet in a new team, a new environment, and it really tests your mind. Were you upset today when you missed the game? Yeah, I can completely relate to how you're feeling. It'll only make your mind stronger.
Yeah, it is.
So Benji's, I think, a bit overwhelmed here at the minute, but he's never usually lost for words because he is our team coach from a young age. So what we look for in the squad of 10 and 11-year-olds that we have is that we have a team coach, someone who comes along board and supports us and creates that bridge between the coaching and the kids, a team captain and a vice captain. And Benji was captain for the last year and a half, and now he's stepped up to team coach, but he's always been naturally a leader for us, as are most of our boys. So I'm sure once he feels a bit more comfortable, he's going to be chatting away to you, as will Cast, Tay, and Mason.
I hope you chat more on the pitch. I bet you do, especially in training.
So that gives us a great point, because Charlotte has just played for Sunderland, but as she said there, she's just moved out to Switzerland, which has just come about in this transfer window, is it?
It has, yes. It was a bit of a drastic turn of events. It wasn't originally planned. I mean, Sunderland's been a club that's very close to my heart since I was very young. I started with them when I was 15 years old, and that was with the women's team. So the likes of Jordan Nobbs, Lucy Bronze, Demi Stokes, were all at Sunderland when I was playing there when I was 15. They moved on because they were a little bit older than me. But I've had a little bit of a crazy career. Things never ever go to plan, and that's sometimes the best way for learning, like what we were just talking about. Sometimes when you're winning all the time, you don't learn as much. So sometimes you learn from your failures. Have you heard the saying about fail, what it stands for? First attempt in learning. So when you're failing all of the time, you're just learning. So I've been back and forward from Sunderland 5 different times. So this last time was my 5th spell with the club, and because obviously women's football's not where it should be in terms of supporting us as a job, I had to look towards an opportunity that's going to support me to be independent and for me to play football for a living rather than just a hobby, because you know yourself how fun it is. How amazing would it be to do it as a job? And I'm lucky enough to say that I can do that now.
And I know that's what a lot of the boys on the group chat are working towards, and that's what their obviously focus is, as it is for most young kids from a young age. And I suppose I work in a school myself, and girls sort of have a horizon of, if this don't work, then I want to do this. Whereas being a boy, and what we're trying to look at is that boys don't always have that option, or they don't always consider plan B. So for a young boy, it's like football or nothing, and they still conclude that when they're 15. But these boys, they're all within the county setup, and they play for Newport County in the academy and development squads, and that's what they're working towards. So they understand the pressures, and it's quite difficult for them when they get a bit of feedback, and they get released at the age of 8 or 9, which is quite hard to deal with for players their age.
Yeah, absolutely. But like what you were just saying, it's all about just playing as a hobby. I mean, even though it's my job now, I literally go to training and think, this is me doing what I love. I'm here to learn. I'm here to have fun. And once you have fun and play with less pressure and don't put so many demands on yourself, that's when you become a better player, because you feel free. If you think about pressure as sitting on your shoulders, okay, the more pressure you put on yourself, the more you're weighing yourself down, the more tense you become when you're actually training. And you've got to feel free, you've got to feel fluent. Yeah, so my advice is never put pressure on yourself.
And in terms of that, as you said, having an injury and just moving to your new club, do you feel pressure now to get back from injury as quick as possible and fit back into the squad, or?
I mean, absolutely. I feel a little bit of pressure there because, I mean, they only brought 2 signings in, and I'm a centre back, and I'm very strong on wanting a clean sheet. My mindset is clean sheet. In this team that I've came to, they need to have that mindset with them being the bottom of the league. And I came in with a huge challenge of trying to have clean sheets in this league. And now I'm going to miss the first game back, because in Switzerland what happens is they have a break in the middle of the season because it's so cold. So the league doesn't restart until the first weekend of February, which is next weekend. And I'm going to miss that game and potentially the game after that, because when I was training at home, I sustained a little calf injury, and I didn't think it was a big injury, but I've came over here, and the stress of the transfer and it being so drastic, Sunderland weren't going to actually let me go, but it was for the best. It was a good opportunity for me, so they were kind enough to let me go. I had an MRI scan over here, and all of a sudden I was thinking, MRI scan? Wow, is it really that serious? And they were saying, no, we just want reassurance what the injury actually is. All sorts was going through my mind. I actually had a bad dream that it was an ACL injury. That was just me being overly dramatic. But that's the type of things that go on in our brains when we face these challenges and these uncertainties. And you just have to learn to control your mind and not think about it too much. So getting the scan results, it turned out that I had a grade 2 tear in my calf. So it was actually worse than what I thought. And you think all of a sudden, oh no, I'm letting the team down, I'm not training. The girls don't actually know me yet. Thankfully, I'm living with them so they can get to know me outside of football. And you just have to learn to try and keep a positive mindset all of the time, and be patient. You've got to be patient, have a lot of patience. So now I'm going to be going to see the physio to try to speed up my recovery. And yeah, I am putting pressure on myself because I want to be back as soon as possible to help the girls. And we've got Savet, who are a really good team in this league, the second game in. So I'm trying to push it for them.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we've started off with our first question. So this could be Shay, Taylor, or Kyron. So one of the boys, you can open up the question and the floor.
Hi, Charlotte. I'm Shay. I'm one of the coaches with Luga. Thanks for doing this for us. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
I've got Kyron, who's our vice captain with me, and Taylor, who's our goalkeeper. One of the questions we've got is obviously you mentioned injuries. And you hear a lot of reports from players that it can be quite lonely when you're injured, because you feel a little bit isolated, which I think is quite apt, obviously, in the world we've just lived in the last 2 years. How do you deal with that? Do you understand the question? How would you normally deal with that from a resilience point of view for the boys?
Yeah. So, sorry, there's a bit of an echo there. It's better now. So obviously, when I came over here, our stadium and the rehabilitation centre are in 2 different places. And my rehabilitation is during the day and we are training in late afternoons. So my schedule is completely different. And the fact that I'm in a new team and I don't necessarily know the staff, know the girls, it does get a little bit lonely, and I'm in a new location with no family or friends. So, but in a way, I kind of like that because you're getting to understand your mind, you're getting to understand your fears, and you're getting to understand when you need to calm your mind and when you need to think positive. And it's always training your mind to think positive. So for me, to train my mind, I listen to a lot of audio books, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I read quite a lot. And I read and listen to things that are going to make my mind positive and are going to make me learn things for the game. So we talked earlier about learning in football. As much as you're so driven to play football, whatever you learn in the outside of football, because you love football so much, you will find a way to relate what you learn to football. So if you go to school, for example, are any of you in secondary school? So are you doing different languages, for example?
Yeah, like French and Welsh.
Yeah. So you see, this was my downfall because when I was in school, I was so obsessed with sport. And I was thinking, all I need to do now is just learn how to play the sport. But if you think of it in a way of, I'm going to a French lesson now because in the future, if I want to do football in the future, and I come across a teammate who's a French player, I want to be able to communicate with that French player. Yeah. So you're actually creating opportunities. And if football doesn't necessarily work out for you, and you're using football as a way to learn other things like languages, art, because art's quite useful for football too, by the way, I'll get into that. If football doesn't work out, you've got so many other things to fall back on. And even though you didn't use French or art to learn about them because you're using it for football, your paths, all of a sudden, you've created another path for yourself because football's helped you do that. So, for example, art. I'm quite creative and artistic, and I started my own coaching business and I designed everything myself, my logo, just because of the passion for football. Okay, so your love for something can help you learn so many different things.
Yeah.
And in terms of that, Charlotte, so going back to the point where Sunderland didn't want to let you go, and having been at the club 5 times, and obviously the different reasons behind leaving and coming back every time, and obviously living situation, all of these factors. If for a club that didn't want to let you go, is it difficult for you then as a player who has an affection and someone who's been there at a club, comparing your future, comparing as a professional footballer, to approach the manager and say, I want to make this move? Is that quite difficult as a player?
Absolutely. I mean, partly because it had been my coach since I was 14 years. She had been my coach since I was 14 years old, and you almost feel not very loyal. But the thing with football is you always have to think about your well-being, okay? Because if your well-being becomes affected, you're going to be affected on the pitch too. So, here's a question for you all. What comes first, the person or the footballer? What do you see yourself as, a person or a footballer?
Good question.
It's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Benji, do you have any thoughts?
So do you see yourself as a footballer or do you see yourself as a person?
Both. Like, I always just like both. Because sometimes instead of football, I do swimming, and like sometimes like away from football most of the times, I like do swimming and then do other stuff like on both.
You think both?
Yeah.
Right, here's one for you. We're human beings. Okay, the human always comes first. Because you think of yourself as a person, right? You have a heart and you have a brain. You take your heart and your brain onto the field, okay? And that personality that you've got, you express that on the field. But if you were just a footballer, okay, you wouldn't really think about your heart or your brain, would you?
No. Because you would just focus on winning the game.
Yeah. So here's another one for you, right? You go to meet a new team, you're involved in a new team. You don't know your teammates' positions. All as you see is their personalities. Do you think you can guess your new teammates' personalities, your new teammates' positions just through their personalities?
I could, yeah, or maybe I could just ask them what position you play, or if they don't speak a language, I could just tell.
Yeah, but do you think the personality has an effect on the position?
Yeah, I think so.
You think? I can see what's
Yeah.
in deep thought. Yeah. So the person is so important because every personality is different, and each person on that team brings something different to that team. You might have one player who's very creative. He's got a creative brain. You might have one player who's quite logical, okay, and he has to problem solve for the team. You might have one player who isn't very good technically, but they can talk, they can communicate, they're a leader, okay? And all of those differences in personalities makes a team, okay? But if everyone was just a footballer, okay, there would be no differences. Okay, so that's why the person comes before the footballer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there, and I think when it comes to personalities and how they're position related, you know, you can have quite a different personality to fit in each position across a pitch, and I suppose you can have quite generic response to personalities in all positions. But I think that some of the traits within those personalities have to be quite position specific, and you know, to fit in and adapt to those roles, you have to be quite determined, you know, as a defender to win the ball and beat the opposition striker every time. And you could transfer that as a striker or a winger, but you could have more physical strength playing as a centre back, but that's not going to quite fit in with your personality. So it's that awareness and that reading of being beaten by the striker as a centre back compared to when you're a striker and you might not have that personality of reading, etc., or communicating with a back line, which you could lack sometimes as a striker in terms of those communicational elements.
Yeah, personality is so important. Who's the brave one? Who's the courageous one? Who's the one that's going to be creative for the team? Who's the one that's going to take charge and problem solve? Yeah, so important. I know England actually test your personality. So I haven't played with the national squad, but I know some of my ex-teammates who have been involved with the national squad said that they've had personality tests.
And I think we got a squad quite big with personality, and we got some of the biggest personalities on call with us now. But one of the biggest personalities that I've got in mind here, in front of me, is Carson. And Carson can be such a level-headed, focused, dedicated player, but the moment he loses his anger and he turns into what we call the Hulk, he's a completely different player. But this sometimes can either go one or two ways. Sometimes he can go negative and he's too angry and he's focused on what's made him angry, and sometimes he channels it and he uses all this aggression to win the ball back, and you can see this grunt in his face where he's running at defenders, he wants to attack, he's winning every ball, he's shooting, and sometimes when he unleashes that Hulk in him, you know, it accelerates his performance a bit more, and he's got that intensity from the front to just that next level, because Carson is always someone who's in fifth gear, and if he never stops running. It's only now that he sat down with bricks on his feet that he's not moving. But yeah, Carson's quite a big personality, as is Benji. Benji used to, read me poems from the age of 3, and Taylor, is climbing up the wall as I'm doing a team talk. And this is just some of the under 11s as their personalities and how we harness this as kids. But Carson, I know you've been waiting. I'm sure you've got a question for Charlotte, so would you like to come in and ask her a question?
Did you always want to be a defender?
Oh, so no, I've never always been a defender. I was actually a centre midfielder up until I was 17 years old, and I went for English college trials, and there was nobody to sit in as centre half for one game. So one of these games, I thought, you know what it is? I'm gonna just, because I didn't want to sit on the sideline. I'm kind of like is it Carson? Or Carson? I'm kind of like Carson, where 100 miles an hour, like boom. I couldn't sit on the sideline and sit still. So I was like, I'm gonna play. I'll play as a centre back, because I used to play the holding midfield role, so I knew the centre back role quite well, anyways. And from there, I had literally had the best game I've ever played of football before. And I asked my manager when I went to college, I says, can I play centre back more often? And it was just this element of control. I could see everything and I could handle everything because I was the one that was controlling things. And that's where I was discovering my personality. So sometimes we get to a certain age in life and we really figure out our own personality. We're still learning how we figure out how we are adapting in life and how we really fit in the world. And that was where I found my position, 17, 18 years old. But that didn't always work out for me, because you learn that some positions, if you're going into academy or if you're going transitioning from academy football to senior football, I was finding it difficult to get in a centre half, because naturally you need central defenders to be the brains and the more mature players on the field. So that's when I had to go back into centre midfield and let the players behind me be the more mature and more knowledgeable players. And it used to really frustrate me because I was impatient. But like you say, the failures teach us how to be patient, and we learn more. So yeah.
And I think there's two key points which I want to pick up there, and the fact that you went and approached your manager or coach at the time and said, "Can I play here more often?" I think just shows how that you had this awareness and adaptability from a younger age, and that decision making to take the leap and to find out what's best for you by playing that position. Where I've worked in an academy myself, and you suggest alternative positions to players who are set in their ways because they've been coached to play one. And they're a bit reluctant to play in these positions, even though they're asked to. But the fact that you've gone and asked whether you can play in a position shows a lot of courage and determination as well, which I think is a really important point for the boys, which is what me and Shay encourage. If they want to play someone like Kyron, who I think is an excellent centre-back, but he likes to play striker, he asks where he can play, and I think that's a really important trait to have. And a communicational element, a relationship with the coaches that everyone should have.
Yeah. So is that why you asked that? Because you like to play both centre back and a striker?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think about it, the two positions actually relate quite similar, because if you're a centre back, you know the centre forward, you know how difficult it is to defend a centre forward who's wild, who's crazy, who hides. So if you transition from centre back to centre forward, you can be that player who's the annoying centre forward, who hides behind your shoulder. Yeah. So learning to play different positions at a young age helps for the position that you're going to set yourself in. So I always advise try different positions.
And I think in terms of that, I'm just going to pick. I think is your dad with you, Cass?
Yeah.
I think I just heard him whisper to you, or because Carson's accelerating, he accelerated and answered with a straight yes. I think if we put Carson in centre back, he wouldn't be very happy. But Carson is more of our winger player. And sometimes when we do put him on a wing back position, he does adapt to it, but it's not his most favoured position. And he hates playing there sometimes because he's got less of the ball, or he's not always running as he could in that creative role up front because he likes to score goals. But I think that's what you've said there about that centre back, the striker, is a really important point because he's got the pace, he's creative, and I think when he can adapt into a left back position, he can understand how to be more defensive while reading the runs behind, which is beneficial to his role up front, but also creates that adaptability and skill set for him to play at left back and left wing back.
And you're learning what's expected of your teammates as well. So if you're playing left back, when you move to a different position, you know where the left back will be on the pitch at certain moments of the game, which will help.
Shay, question? Or Kyron?
Yeah, hi Charlotte. I guess it's me again. I've got a couple of shy boys now. They don't want to ask the questions themselves.
Okay.
So I'm literally, I feel like a channel, just channeling questions through. One of the things that we as coaches teach the boys to do in a game is not to go hell for leather in the first 5 minutes, and to sort of work out what we're up against. And I think that's particularly important for centre back and defensive players. And the question we've got is that something that you do? And if so, are there any tips and tricks around how you do that?
When I was at Sunderland, we used to have our coaching staff obviously find out a little bit of research about the other team. I know that's quite easy when there's video footage and stuff, and when you don't have that video footage, you do observe on the day. I think, me personally, I like to focus on my own performance and not think about the other team too much, because I think it's important that you should be confident in your own ability, and no matter who you play against, what you have got to offer is going to beat that other person. Kind of like the Michael Jordan mindset. Why do you think about too much about what they're doing when if you think about what you're doing, you're not going to waste any time. However, there is a way where you can observe in warm-ups to see if you can pick up on any weaknesses. So if you identify the weaknesses rather than watch for their strengths, that's when you can work it out. So yeah, the first 5 minutes, yeah, but don't think about it too much. Focus on your game.
Fantastic. And Mace, do you have a question for Charlotte?
If you were put in charge of a women's football tomorrow, what would you change and why?
What, like a women's team?
Like charging anything, like football manager.
I think having a culture, setting a culture, a good culture, an organisation. Organisation for me is key, because what organisation does, it reassures players that things are going to go well, and you're going to install that positive mindset. Because think about when I told you about my scan, yeah? What did I all of a sudden start to do? Can anyone remember? The club that I just came to in Switzerland told me, oh, you're going to be going in for a scan. What all of a sudden did I start to think?
You were worrying because of...
Yes. So if you have to take over a team, okay, and you tell people what's expected of them and tell them how organised you're going to be and reassure players what's going to happen, how things are going to be, they all of a sudden think, oh, I'm excited. It's going to have a lot of structure, okay? And when people have a clear mind, that's when they're taking information. But if they're filled with so many thoughts of worries and fears and doubts, your confidence dips, your self-esteem dips, and you can't learn, okay?
Yeah.
So I think organisation and a good structure.
And to build on Mason's question there, and to try and ask it from another perspective, if you was put in charge of women's football, say by FIFA, to change all of football for women all around the world, and this is the program you were going to instill, or what changes would happen, what would you change about the women's game entirely, or how would you try and produce more women footballers, or what would your strategy be, for example?
I strongly believe that girls' football should be mixed with boys for academies, because from there I think you can handpick the talent who can compete with boys. And because I played boys' football until I was 15, and I was just as good as them until the physicality started to change. And I think if you see some girls who can actually compete with the boys, that's when you know they're good. But sometimes it's difficult to identify those players if they're just playing girls' football. And you also get to see the girls who've got the big hearts. I mean, the likes of Steph Horton, Jill Scott, Demi Stokes, they all played boys' football and they weren't scared. I wasn't scared. Whereas some girls who are naturally good, talented, but don't go up against the boys, why do you think they don't go up against the boys? Why do you think they wouldn't? Even though they are really, really good.
Because I think they might not have the physicality, because with boys it's more rougher.
Because they're what?
They're like they have more strength and physicality, and then when they like just push you over or like shoulder barge you, they can like just roll over or like tumble down.
But what's telling them that they're not as physical? Their own minds are telling them that they're not as physical, that they're not as good. So carry on.
Maybe it's not them, but maybe it's like their mind. They're like, nah, just don't do it.
Yeah, so that's where you can see the girls who haven't got strong mentalities. Where if you have a girl who's mentally strong as well as physically strong, that's when you know that they're going to be good, and you can handpick out the players that are going to develop even more rapidly. It's funny, I had a conversation with one of my teammates today about natural ability. So do you think you're born gifted as a gifted footballer, or do you think you develop being a footballer?
I think you develop being a footballer.
Yeah.
A bit of both, but you've always genetically, you've always going to have some sort of natural talent. So if you start out with a natural talent down here, and there's somebody else who has a natural talent here, who's got the head start?
Boys, I think. One at the top.
This one here. Okay, but if this one works twice as hard as this player, okay, they can catch up. But if you're here and you work hard, your development's gonna shoot up. Okay. So having that natural talent is important because it gives you a head start. And as the years go on in your career, how old are you all now? 11?
10.
10? 11? Yeah. So the harder you work, the quicker you're going to develop. So for me, okay, I was really, really, really good at a young age. But it got to the point where in my teenage years, when I started to play women's football, my confidence dipped a lot. Okay. And when my confidence dipped, I stopped working hard. Yeah. So always be confident in your natural ability to be able to learn more and develop more.
So when you played mixed football with boys then, Charlotte, did you at any point play girls only football at a time or play in a girls league, for example?
Yeah, so when I was 11, so from my era, it was once you can play one season of 11-a-side football when you're 11. So in year 7 in school. And then you have to stop playing boys football with the club.
Yeah.
And that's where I moved into all girls, which I didn't like. But I was still able to play for my school team with the boys while I was playing girls football.
And in terms of that, when you went from boys to girls football, not to put this in the wrong perspective, but did you feel at times there were less challenges because of the physicality and the environment that you were put in, being in a mixed environment and team compared to a girls only, for example?
I mean, my physicality was a lot stronger than most girls.
Yeah.
I think it still is. And the girls used to be scared to come and tackle me. They didn't want to get the ball. Whereas the boys, it's funny because I think sometimes, depending on the player, sometimes boys might want to be scared to tackle the girl. But I was the type of girl where the boys were like, no, I'm going to snap her. Okay. So I used to get a lot of physical challenge from the boys. And because I went into girls football and I didn't get those challenges, I didn't like it.
And I think this is a key learning curve because we've just started a new under-10s team and we've got a young female in there. And I've just observed her in games, and when one of the boys, say for example, the ball's come in and he's made he's gone straight for a clearance by the time the ball's come in, and it's gone her direction, she's flinched and turned her back and she's scared, and you know she's 8 years of age, and I think over time you have to sort of make her so confident that that's not going to happen. But so far at the start of her game, and that flinching and being scared of the ball, is something that we need to try and support and nurture a way out of her. But it gives a contrast of what we're used to in boys football in terms of constant physicality and the constant shoulder barging and all everything else that comes with it, and what she has to get used to in boys football.
Mm-hmm. So when I heard the one word that I heard you say, nurture, I think for you boys, if you want to play against a girl there, you wouldn't necessarily nurture them and say, oh, it'll be all right next time, because that's only going to make her, it's going to make her mindset soft. What you need to do is you need to just say, you need to go and challenge for that. Okay, you got to push players into that mindset. There was actually one girl who I played with at Sunderland, very, very, very good player, and she's in England under 18s at the moment. When she first signed for Sunderland when she was 16, the step up from academy football to senior football, she didn't want to head the ball. And I was constantly reminding her, look, like, you're going to have to toughen up. I couldn't nurture her, because if I nurtured her, that would make her soft. I says, you need to step it up. So I would purposely, in training, barge her, purposely get cross balls in for her, make her head the ball. In the previous season, before I've just left, there was one situation when we were playing against Liverpool. She actually blocked the ball in the face and landed in the back of the net. And that's in the space of 2 years. And I thought, wow, I was so proud. She never used to head the ball. So that's my advice. If you play with a girl and she's a little bit soft, you need to give her more nudges. Yeah.
And I think it's great to have that perspective from what you say there, and I can capture that bit and cut it specifically for the young girl in under 10. And I think that's a really good point from someone like yourself for her to hear and be supportive in that capacity. And I think it's great to involve parents in that learning environment. And I think although she's new to Grassroots and new to football entirely, it's really important to try and get her up to speed so she can maximise and enjoy it. We've had a female footballer with us previously, and I'm not sure whether you know Lee Collins, the footballer captain of Yeovil. His daughter played for our Grassroots team for many years, and now she's playing female football. Now, for me, seeing what she plays against and where she's been, she's sort of regressed because there's less of that physical environment, and there's less of that presence, there's less challenges. And when I speak to mum, and mum's like, oh, she scored 10 goals this weekend, and I was like, okay, she's easily scored them. And compared to like getting 4 goals, 2 assists, clearing, covering the pitch in boys football, I feel there's been a little bit of regression there. So for me, involving girls in boys football for mixed is very important to me, and I think that they should be involved quite closely to develop that environment that you're talking about.
Absolutely, I agree. And I mean, I don't think all of the girls are going to be up for it, but that's where you're going to get the chance to handpick the girls that are good enough, not just physically, but mentally too. And
it's all about how we instill that in our coaching curriculum and what we do as a club to support that and harness that. And support the players, because I'm not just about taking players in and fitting them into squads and then going, we need to make a girls squad, or you need to find a girls team. I want to really support each and every player that comes through, and especially when we do get girls, that we're mindful and aware of this and how we involve them to support them in that capacity and being aware of their needs. But it's a great environment for us to grow as a club, and certainly for this young female. And even though we're quite male orientated and focused because of the membership and intake of the club, growing the girls' capacity and support for them is key for us moving forward for that environment that we want to create.
Absolutely.
Shay, do you have another question, mate?
Yeah, I do. I apologise. This is not the boys. This is me.
Okay.
One of the things that we try to teach the boys about is, have you ever heard of a thing called insights, Charlotte, which is sort of color coded for personalities?
Yes. Yeah.
So I come from a sales background where insights is key, and we've run insights with the boys about color coding and how they measure their teammates and different personalities, and how they, so for example, how they give feedback to their fellow players, and in different ways to measure their personalities. Have you got, I'm sort of coming from a professional environment, is there examples that you can share with the boys of when you've had to sort of maybe change your approach because of a personality of one of your colleagues, and so as not to sort of encourage as opposed to demoralize, if you see what I mean?
You do that, not just outside, like, doesn't echo again. It's all right. It's calmed down. So yeah, as a leader on the pitch, as a centre back, the communicator, I have to do that all the time. I can't necessarily talk to one personality on the pitch the way I talk to another. If I shout at someone who's a centre midfielder and is a little bit constructive, that might make her motivation and her confidence dip a little bit, and she needs a little bit more encouragement. You might get that one player who requires that hand on the shoulder, reassurance, it's going to be okay. Or you might get that one player who really needs you to be a little bit aggressive to them. Come on, step it up. Otherwise, their energy levels just seem to be low, and they'll dip, and they'll really need that little bit of aggression. So yeah, personality and getting to understand people's personalities is so important. But also, say for example, you need to tell someone how to do something correctly, and because they're not necessarily doing it in a certain way, it's that learning to recognize when they might become a little bit sensitive, because we're all sensitive sometimes, and we become sensitive, more sensitive on some days than other days. So it's learning to recognize people's emotions too. So it's important that you watch people's face expressions all of the time. Emotional intelligence, it's called. Have any of you heard of that?
Yep.
Yeah. So emotional intelligence is so important. You've got to observe people's face to be able to understand how they're feeling in that moment in order to know what you should say to them. If they need a little bit of an uplift, or if they need like a little bit of constructive criticism or reassurance.
We've been teaching them about, and pardon my French, but in fairness, we have taught this to the boys. It's called the shit sandwich, Charlotte, where we talk about positive feedback around the outside of constructive criticism. So you give them a positive comment, then you tell them what you want them to understand, and then you finish it up with a positive comment. So they're kind of getting the gist of that. But yeah, no, thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think they're really good takeaway messages for all the boys in understanding their team. But specifically for Benji and Kyron in their roles as player, coach and captain, for them to understand how to support their teammates and support the squad around them. And that's the key takeaways I want you both to take away. We've got less than 10 minutes now left with Charlotte, and then the chat will shut off automatically. But is there any questions that we wanted to filter into Charlotte before we let her go? And just before I say goodbye and whatnot, I think it's been really insightful so far. And even though we've only gone for an hour, it'd be great to get you on at a future point, because I've taken a few notes from you just listening to you, and this has been great so far. So, Carson, do you have any questions for Charlotte?
What was your favourite match I've ever played?
Do you know what? Actually, my most recent game, we played against Liverpool in the Continental Cup before I came out here in Switzerland. And I'll tell you why it was a really memorable game, because it was an evening game, and Sunderland, we only had 4 part-time contracted players. I was one of those part-time contracted players. The rest of the girls either worked full-time or students. And Liverpool were a full-time professional outfit. So because it was an evening game, not many of the girls had had the proper preparation, and they were very tired. So on a personal level, I had to step up my game a lot. I had to take a lot of responsibility, and there was pressure on my shoulders. Not just because of that, but also because, remember we talked about your well-being having to be good in order to play. So my well-being wasn't very good. I was starting to become a little bit down every day. I had to really force myself to pick myself up. So going into this game, I was really motivated. There was so many things wanting to motivate me going into this game before Christmas, because the Liverpool assistant coach used to be my manager at Sunderland, and I had a couple of ex-teammates there who didn't treat me very nice when I was a young player and they were senior players. So I wanted to get that revenge, sort of. And we ended up taking them to penalties, and we ended up winning on penalties. So that game is going to go down in my heart, because it was my last game for Sunderland.
Fantastic. And Mason, would you like to ask Charlotte one more question before we let her go? And then it'd be great to try and finish on that point from you.
How many goals have you scored in your career, and what? Oh no, I forgot. Just how many goals have you scored in your career?
Well, I'm a centre back, so I haven't scored too many, but I think on average around 30, if I'm including when I was at Newcastle and I was centre midfield at Newcastle. But we also had a season where I scored 7 for Sunderland. Do you remember the COVID season where everything got cancelled?
Yeah.
So on paper, those 7 goals don't count. So on average, I think it was 28 in total, if I remember my CV. If you ask me clean sheets, though,
Go on, mate, ask the question.
I prefer a clean sheet of a goal.
How many clean sheets do you have?
I don't even know. More clean sheets than I have goals.
Oh.
So yeah, I think we've just not to wrap Charlotte up, because I said it'd be about an hour, and she's living a very busy life, and she's just moved away, and she's got a lot to take on at the moment, especially in her transition. But as I said, it'd be great to get Charlotte on at another point over the next few weeks and when her schedule allows, because it's been really insightful, and I think we've only just scratched the surface with some of the questions we've asked, and I'm sure the boys got a lot more, and there's so much more that I'd like to ask you, and I think it'd be great to have you on again, and certainly continue to share everything we've learned, and then talk about your return from injury and how you're settling in as well, which would create a bigger context and that holistic view. But I'm really grateful, as are all the boys and Shay, for your time, for coming on, and I know everyone who's going to watch this on the playback, once we share it across our channels, will be grateful. But I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'll catch up with you later by another message. But we wish you the best of luck over the next few weeks, and return with injury, and look after yourself. But I know all the boys are very thankful, and it's been great to have you on.
No problem at all. It's been my pleasure, and it's actually been a good way for me to reflect and for my own learning too. It's really important as a player that you have a lot of self-reflection. So there's another tip.
Thanks, Charlotte. If you're ever in Newport and you fancy giving the boys a coaching session, we're a lovely little town in Wales. I promise we'll just drive you through it, in and out of it, do the coach. I've got to stay. So
one of my best friends is actually from Wales. He plays for York. So maybe if I'm down visiting him sometime.
Perfect. You're more than welcome.
Okie doke.
And I'm
Take care,
surprised.
everyone.
I'm surprised, Shay, you didn't say about going abroad, mate. But Charlotte, it's been fantastic.
Obviously, if there's an opportunity to play friendlies in Switzerland, we're more than happy to come over and do that. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we're late to travel on.
I'll speak to Lugano for you. They've got a good voice setup.
Perfect. Thank you, Charlotte.
Okie doke. Take care, boys.
Thank you very much. It's been really great. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
Nice to meet
boys.
you all.
Thank you, Shay.
Bye bye.